Hello and welcome to the Omega Beam number 25. I'm your host, Orrin Merton, and for those who listened to the last episode, you know that my studio is in pieces, and it still isn't together. So I had mentioned last time that I thought it would be pretty difficult for me to get an episode out during September, and here we are, the very end of September, and this is the one and only episode. Luckily, I do have options and mobile rigs and the like, so I'm able to still get something out. It just isn't quite as easy, and my apologies if the sound isn't quite up to its normal standards. So this is going to be a shorter episode, and I want to talk about the fantasy movie of the day, The House with a Clock in Its Walls. It came out, I think, a week ago, and I believe it debuted in the United States as number one. But of course, that doesn't mean nearly as much as when, the Avengers movies or the Star Wars movies or these, huge movies come out and they debut at number one, making $100 million in a weekend. This was a smaller movie. It had a fraction of the budget, and it made a fraction of the money, but it's been doing well enough that I believe it's already either surpassed or will surpass soon its budget. So, hey, good for this movie. It's called The House with a Clock in Its Walls, and it's based on a middle grade book. So middle grade in America is basically like 11 to 13 or 14. So we're talking about a book that's kind of aimed at tweens and teens, but it still has enough sort of adult content that if you just like fantasy and are adult and want to go, or if you're bringing your kids or whatever, you're not going to be bored out of your mind and be like, oh, this is the most childish thing I've ever seen. It's not. And it tries to deal with some adult issues of loss and all that comes with loss, as far as, the inability to be yourself, to act, to get back on your feet, self-esteem, all these kinds of things. And it does so in an okay way. I overall, I would give this movie a good review. I liked it. This was a fun movie. It was a creepy movie. It was an effectively creepy movie. In other words, it's aimed at kids. It's not going to be gory. It's not going to give anybody nightmares. I should specify, maybe very young kids. I'm not sure I'd bring very young kids. We sat next to a 10-year-old kid who was having the time of his life. So maybe younger, maybe 4, 3, whatever, might be a little too young, maybe images that are scary. But if you're older, it won't frighten you to death or anything, but it is filmed in such a way as to be effectively creepy. And I think we have to give credit to the director. Now, I have never seen anything that Eli Roth, the director, had done, because he's a horror movie director, and I don't like horror movies. But this movie was released by Amblin Entertainment, which is Spielberg's company, aimed at younger kids, and I give the director a lot of credit. He was able to keep that sensibility of what makes people squirm while bringing it to a middle grade age level. And to be honest with you, that's what works best for me, because I'm really 13, because I don't need gore and that kind of excessive, torture porn and all that in horror. I like creepiness, but I don't like the horror gore. So if you like things that are on the creepy side of fantasy without, being like gross, I think this was really it. So that's just the movie as a whole. I think the acting should also be given some notice. Jack Black is best when he's more restrained. And this was one of those films in which he was more restrained. He wasn't playing Jack Black, the crazy out there, over the top with everything. There was still some of that, but he was also just playing the character of Uncle John. And so a lot of credit to him for that. And sort of his friend, not quite girlfriend, but sort of life mate, if you will, was played by Cate Blanchett. Mrs. Zimmerman, played by Cate Blanchett, and she does an amazing job. And I don't know if she's capable of doing anything less than an amazing job. The heavy in the movie is played by Kyle MacLachlan, who of Twin Peaks fame, and he also again pulls in a really good performance. And the young boy, I wasn't sure that he was going to pull it off when I first saw him, but Owen Vaccaro is his name. And I'd never seen him before, but he does a fine job as sort of the central protagonist of the movie. I wouldn't say that this is a perfect movie. I think that it touches on a lot of very serious issues, such as death in the family, loss, self-esteem, things like that. But I think in order to keep it maybe not too heavy for its audience, I think it really glosses over some of that. For example, the movie is set in 1955 against a backdrop of people who've really suffered in World War II, and there's references to Mrs. Zimmerman losing her family, but in Paris, she's from Paris, but there's no... It doesn't go into it. It never expands on that. You're supposed to accept that the person that she is has been profoundly impacted, but it's never gone into in the kind of depth or detail that would really make us empathize with what she's gone through. And that's kind of how the movie does. It sort of skims a little bit beneath the surface, but not far. So, as I said, it's an enjoyable movie. The plot holds together. It's one of those just run with the magic. Whenever a movie is about magic, that in a way, I find it almost liberating to basically say this movie is about magic. In other words, don't try and imagine plausibility. Don't sit there and say, well, how could that spaceship do? Don't. This isn't science. Just sit back, turn your logical mind off, and enjoy the story. And the story is enjoyable, and the characters are enjoyable, and the effects are wonderful. This was a low-budget movie. God, it sounds so funny to call a $42 million movie low budget, but when you're talking about Avengers movies that are $200+ million, suddenly 42 million sounds like an art piece. But it was a smaller movie. It was a smaller release, but they really did the most with the money. They got a great cast. The story was good. It was well directed. But at the same time, like I said, go in knowing what you're getting. It's a movie that sort of, its heart is for tweens and teens. So don't expect a deep treatise on the human condition, and you will enjoy it because it's fun. This is a fun movie. I would recommend this movie hands down to anyone of that age and their parents. I enjoyed it. I'm an adult. So that is a house with a clock in its walls. And that is also our podcast. So thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review in the Apple Podcasts app or the iTunes Store, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any suggestions or questions, please drop us a line at info@theomegabeam.com. You can read the show notes at theomegabeam.com/25. Thank you again. Be good to yourselves and each other, and I will catch you next time.